Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. My name's Neil Munro.
And I'm Ian Stone, and today we're talking about issues around asbestos removal works in lofts and attics, kind of high up ceilings, that kind of thing, or above the ceiling. Essentially, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, because generally there's a bit more that needs to be considered and thought about, and they're not quite a standard working environment, are they?
No, exactly that. I mean, if you take asbestos removal in an office, for instance, a standard kind of thing, well, you decant the room, you go in, you do the removal works, and then it can be kind of reused, reoccupied, whatever afterwards.
Yeah, definitely from like a hazard point of view. Really, your sort of main focus is the asbestos.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're working in a loft or an attic, the asbestos is still your main focus, but there's equally some additional hazards,
Exactly.
additional requirements to sort of think about. And
I suppose the most obvious one is the fall from the height and the risk from that.
Lofts come in all shapes and sizes, don't they? They come in different areas of buildings, and there's different locations below them. For instance, you may have a loft in a house where you've got a bedroom probably below it, which is, 2.5 metres below to the floor. And you may have a loft over a big hall where you've got, 20 metre drop below.
Exactly that, yeah. And that's the kind of the thought process behind this one. It's the larger scale type stuff. I mean, we've had works within offices and lofts above them, haven't we?
Yeah.
And I mean, as part of that, some of the things that we had to consider and kind of take on board was the occupants below. Can they occupy that area below during the day or during the night, even if we do night works and stuff? And it was kind of looking at all of that. And I mean, the client looked at rehousing the workers. So that's a massive issue of decanting a whole floor of people that need to be moved and shifted so that their work can continue.
So, where you're not necessarily working in an area that is occupied.
No, that's it. You're separate to that,
but
you still need to think about the people below, because falling through, dropping stuff, all the rest of it.
Because most lofts don't have a floor, do they, as such?
No.
What you'll see is the upside of the ceilings below.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, luckily you might get a small little walkway or something like that, but generally speaking, a lot of the time you just go into the void.
Couple of planks.
Yeah, a couple of planks. That's just the people that are in there. It's like just a few planks that you can walk across, and that's about it. Most of the time you go into a loft and you just see the joists and the insulation or whatever. Sometimes you don't even see the joists because the insulation's like that high to meet kind of the insulation regs or requirements that they need. You then don't even know
where to stand.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you can't even make an area safe and walkable until you've seen what the joists are.
Definitely.
So for removal works, I mean, how do we circumvent that? Well, it can be boarded out. The lofts can. You can use things like, Youngman's boards, scaffolding, things like that. But that poses a risk.
And it depends on what you've got to do in that area as well, doesn't it?
Exactly. If you've got to clean the entire loft, then, that's okay using those things for access. But then that creates another problem because you've got to clean under that as part of the works.
So lofts, generally speaking, what sort of asbestos are we looking at in there? Generally speaking, it's mostly insulation purposes, isn't it, in lofts?
Pipe insulation or tanks.
Any pipes running through there, insulated. Fire breaks.
Asbestos cement and insulating board fire breaks, both of them.
Maybe sort of tiles from the roof. That have come into the loft. Water tanks, as you said. Pipes, flue pipes. Redundant flue pipes that have just been launched in there.
Literally launched in the corner.
That's kind of generally speaking. That's about it. Felt maybe from the underside of the roofs.
And depending on what material it is, does depend on how complex the works are and what you've got to do.
Yes, definitely. So if you've just got a redundant flue pipe that's just been taken down and left in the loft.
Yeah, that's an easy clean up, an easy kind of collection of that material, a relatively straightforward clean around that area.
Yeah.
There's
Water
not...
tanks are always an interesting one, getting them out there.
Yeah, because some of them are too big for the loft hatch.
Generally speaking, most of them are, aren't
Yeah,
they?
they were installed before the roof went on. They were put into the loft and then the roof was put over the top. So the only way generally to get them out is to take the slates off or the roof tiles and take them back out the way they went in.
Or control break
them to get them out. But again, that kind of, is there a need for that? That then falls to the risk assessment and what the client wants to do as part of their ongoing management plan. And
that's generally why, as surveyors going into these lofts, why they're all still there is because there's no need.
No, at the end of the day, they are low-risk materials in a low-risk area. You don't have lots of people in and out of a loft, usually. Maybe at Christmas.
Yeah.
But that's literally about it, isn't it?
Yeah. So, it does really depend on what asbestos material is there and what the actual job is.
Yeah.
So, we're going to sort of take worst-case scenarios.
Yeah, so worst case, I would say, is going to be something like asbestos insulation on pipes, something like that within an entire loft void, and it all needs removing.
Yeah, so essentially saying the asbestos damage, friable condition, and it's essentially contaminated the loft void in its entirety.
Yeah, and that is kind of end of the scale, worst case scenario, really, isn't it, on that? So for that,
that's what we need to consider.
Well, it needs to be a full formal asbestos enclosure.
Yeah.
So that presents its own problems of how do you seal the ceiling below? You can make your access into the loft space.
What sort of stuff do we need to consider on that? Obviously, access-wise, because generally speaking, loft access hatches
are tiny. Yeah, exactly.
Squeezing through to get in it, aren't you? And sometimes there's not a lot of height, is there, between the actual loft hatch and if there's an apex or anything like that.
Yeah, if it's on the side.
Yeah, it's getting in sometimes, isn't it?
Exactly. Like you say, we're taking the worst case scenario. So a loft where there's a lot of stuff to come out.
Yep.
Well, there's two things need to consider. One is how do we get in there? But secondly, how do we get the stuff out? So I think you'd have to look at creating pods and access areas, one for people and one for waste and equipment. So like you say, a normal loft hatch is a tiny little thing usually.
Yeah.
It's all right for a person to climb up and in, but not when you're actually doing work. So
you're trying to get stuff in and out.
Exactly. So you'd need to look at creating new hatches in the ceiling. So you'd need to kind of take over sections of the building below to build these pods and access areas in so that personnel can get in and out of the loft safely, and also asbestos waste can be removed safely. And also with that, off of the pod, you're going to need to construct the 3-stage airlock.
Yeah.
Again, so you're going to be taking over a relatively large space
below
that section. So first and foremost, you need to know how you're getting in and how you're getting the stuff out.
Yeah. To then work out, how the enclosure is going to be built and how are you going to be getting stuff in and out.
Yeah. Also with that, another thing that you need to look at and think about is where is your negative pressure unit going? If there's only one entrance, well, you can't vent back out that particularly easily. So again, you'd need to look at either creating another access hatch or area, or even taking off sections of the roof to vent out those sections.
If you're lucky, they might have a window or something in the loft or something like that.
Yeah, dormers, that kind of thing.
Equally, if it, not all lofts are straight, are they? So some, if they're going off in different directions, you need to consider air movement in that respect, don't you, as well? So maybe you need, several locations where you've got negative pressure units and air inlets as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
To draw the clean air in.
Then you kind of move on to the enclosure construction. So I kind of mentioned it. It's how are you sealing everything? So below the loft, you might have ceiling roses where all the electric's coming through from above, all the pipes.
Always penetrations through and stuff.
Exactly. How are you going to seal all those areas?
Because a lot of heating systems do actually, come up from the boiler into the loft, and then, some do actually penetrate down into the according rooms and stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if you've got a cold water supply in the loft, all those pipe works could be penetrating down back into the actual building. So there's a lot to sort of look at and figure out, because you might not be able to necessarily seal it from the top. You may have to look at sealing the voids below. So that may involve opening up the risers so you can properly seal them up and stuff like that. So talking about enclosure construction, anything else to consider on that?
Not off the top of my head, I think.
Negative pressure, access requirements, What about...
I suppose it's doing the job next, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there anything sort of fall arrest that we need to consider before we actually get in with the construction of the enclosure?
Yeah, and you do need to look at the kind of fall arrest from the people working above, and the more height you've got, like you said earlier, it could be an really old building that's got a 20 metre high ceiling. Well, you're going to need a decent fall arrest system for that, and a way of capturing anything that falls and things like that. And I know contractors, some have used airbags for kind of the fall system.
Which would scare me.
Yeah, do you want to be a stuntman for a day? Who's going to be the dummy that tests it? So yeah, there's airbags as an option, there's netting as an option.
Yes. Through to scaffold. You've actually got a safe platform that's been constructed, directly below.
Yeah, which means that nobody is going to fall. A foot might go through and then you're hitting a solid platform.
That's the ultimate safe zone, isn't it? I would say.
And that way, I mean...
And the most expensive as well.
Exactly, that is. One of the cheaper options, and it is still practical, there's kind of no lesser option with these, would be a fall arrest tethered system on the personnel working in the loft.
Yeah.
But that does have a bit of an issue sometimes. If you've got a very, high apex where the tether is onto the main beam running through the loft, but the apex is very, very wide, then...
Does limit how far you can reach.
Exactly, because you might end up with a tether that's longer, and if you do fall through, well, you're actually going to fall through and hit the floor because you need that extra length to get to the edge.
Yeah.
So that can pose an issue on where people can tether on properly and safely to access all areas.
Yeah.
And like you say, when it's asbestos removal, we need to access all these areas, every single point of that enclosure, and the loft needs to be cleaned. It needs to be got to. It needs to be inspected by the analyst afterwards. The contractor will have needed to have hoover and wipe down every single section of that.
Yeah. So
they have got to get literally to every point.
Yeah, which is not always practical in a loft.
No.
Is it?
No.
Because there are, by the construction of some lofts, inaccessible areas, isn't there? Like small crevices where the actual roof meets the top of the ceilings, in the eaves. Sometimes it's not always possible to actually get into all those areas, is it?
And you could have a situation where you've got voids that are open that may or may not be contaminated.
Yeah.
But from a point of view, if you can't get in there to clean it, and you can't get in there to visually inspect it and say it is asbestos free, then that area kind of needs to be considered of what you're going to do. Do you end up taking parts of the brickwork down to gain access in there that will then need to be reconstructed afterwards, or do you take the opinion of capping the area off? And if you are going to do that, well, that still needs to be inspected as part of the 4-stage clearance by the analyst, and then afterwards the area should be capped off. It shouldn't be done kind of prior, should it?
Yeah. That should definitely fall into stage 2.
I mean, other access issues along that, it's kind of like, well, if you have got a really large pitch on a loft or an attic, how are you actually going to get up to that section?
Yeah,
so you might have a pitch within the loft that might be 4 or 5 metres larger.
Yeah, so you actually need access equipment.
Access in there.
The loft.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is always a real nightmare getting in and out.
It is, and again, you've then got the issue of making an area safe for you to build the platform on.
Yes.
Because you're building a platform on joists, so again, you need to kind of make sure the joists and that bottom platform is sturdy for you to then build the platform to get up to these areas.
Yeah, exactly. This kind of sometimes falls into, you might need a licensed scaffolder to assist you with those specialist access areas.
Yeah, and I mean, in a very large kind of loft, you may even have to do it in sections, and it'd be scaffolded out, clean the top section, that gets passed off before you then work down on the other sections, on the other stages of the scaffold.
Yeah.
It kind of...
2-tier sort of...
Yeah, 2-tier system. Yeah, exactly that. So, what else with the asbestos removal works? If things are happening during the works, what happens if there is a breach?
That kind of needs to be considered before you start work, doesn't it?
No, exactly.
Definitely. What are you going to do? So, if there is a risk of, somebody putting through a foot through the ceiling below, if it's like lave and plaster or plasterboard, it doesn't take much to actually put a foot through that type of material, does it?
No, it only takes a little stumble. And,
exactly. Just even a bit of pressure, a bit of pressure on there, you drop your hammer.
Yeah.
that's going to go straight through the plasterboard ceiling.
Yeah.
So yeah, that needs to be considered on what's happening below the ceilings.
Yes.
And what are you going to do to remedy that? In the
Yes.
ideal world, it would be completely
Unoccupied.
You're basically eliminating the risk of anyone being, one, exposed for a breach in the enclosure, or two, being hurt from
Getting clonked on the
getting
head.
clonked on the head or stuff falling through or etc. So that's the ideal situation, isn't it? And that's
Yeah.
the preferred, really. You're eliminating the risk.
Yeah, it gets rid of it completely.
Yeah, and asbestos removal works is really noisy, isn't it? It's really noisy.
It's demolition.
You've got negative pressure units running, which are really loud. You've got vacuum cleaners. You've got maybe, a bit of deconstruction of asbestos material. So, using hand tools and stuff like that, and banging and unscrewing and stuff like this.
You've got personnel in the loft trying to
You've got
communicate.
people shout each other with masks on.
Exactly. And because of that,
Yeah.
you have to shout even louder because your voice is muffled.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out who's doing what, or you need a hand with something or whatever, you've got to communicate that, and you've got
Yeah.
to do it very loud.
Yeah, so taking away the actual...
The risks as such. Yeah, being next to asbestos removal, it's a pain in the arse.
Yeah.
You can't do your normal day stuff. So like saying, if it is an office below, well, you can't kind of have your normal day-to-day works below that because there's a lot of noise going on.
You mentioned it earlier, lots of people go for that, okay, well, we're in the day, we'll do the asbestos removal at night.
Yeah.
Which kind of solves that problem of the noise and the disruption factor. But
what about, saying, if there is a breach?
Yeah, so are you prepared that if something does happen, there is a breach, so what do we do about that?
Yeah.
Because essentially, if you've not considered, something coming through the ceiling, and you could potentially be ending up contaminating the room below.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody puts a foot through, whatever's in that loft, the insulation falls down, it's going to...
Dripping out of the loft, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to land on Sonia's desk, on a computer.
And you can't clean computers, can you?
No,
You can't clean the carpet, you can't clean the fabric chairs.
Exactly.
So potentially you're going to end up
contaminating
stripping
an area.
the room below.
Yeah, which can't happen and wouldn't happen because you'd consider it first.
Yeah.
So how could you work around
eliminate that? The ultimate, again, is going back to if you put in a temporary ceiling below it.
Yeah.
So, we're using scaffolding, completely bored out the ceiling. So you've got, an additional layer, polythene sheet that out completely. You've then got a clean, sealed,
You've got an environment
that was, if anything goes wrong, it's contained within that environment.
Yeah, you've got an environment that can become contaminated without a larger issue occurring.
So what would happen if there was a breach? Depending on that, you could actually just open it up and drop into that area, clean it out and
reseal it
and stuff like that. So that's that's really expensive.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit impractical in certain situations.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that before in when I've done works in a plenum, and it was within a retail store, and they did exactly that. Built a whole tower scaffold throughout the shop.
Yeah.
Lit it throughout the shop. The shop continued to trade, but it had the height and the space to do that.
Yeah.
Whereas in an office or at home or anywhere like that, you're not going to have that space because the scaffolding takes up so much room.
Exactly that. And maybe if you were taking out the ceiling as part of the works as well, which, if it was like something like a lava and plaster ceiling, which generally speaking, it's pretty hard or sometimes impossible to completely say that's asbestos free.
Yeah, you
cleaning
can't.
those types of surfaces. So you may consider taking out the ceiling as well, and therefore you would need that additional sort of scaffolding below to open up into the enclosure.
Yeah, because then you need to attack it from above and below.
Yeah,
and the analyst needs to attack it from above and below because. Then you can access all the areas to visual it and make sure it is safe and okay.
Yeah. So what other options have we got then? So that's kind of like the top end, most expensive, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, other options are sheeting and sealing the room below.
Yes.
The ceiling below, so it captures asbestos migration from the kind of contaminated area into the non-contaminated area. Yeah. But because it is...
To do that, you'd have to completely decamp, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and that's it. The only way to do it properly is to decamp because everything needs to be sheeted out. I mean, large items perhaps could be left in a room.
And sheeted out as well.
And sheeted out.
Yeah.
But essentially, you're kind of creating a mini enclosure, essentially.
Yeah. Just in case.
Just in case, and that's the thing. So if you've got a massive open sales floor or open office or something that's been decamped, well... okay, that's one thing. But then if you've got lots of individual offices and lots of individual rooms, again, the time to do that starts to kick in, and you need to consider that as well.
Definitely.
It makes it hard.
And if you're a trading occupation or trading facility, it's really hard to sort of decamp. You know, how do you decamp a whole company?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Exactly. Right, we've got to move this whole floor of 500 people. Well, nobody's got the space for 500 people.
No, exactly.
What's the cost for that? And there's a lot to consider.
There is. And, you know, you may then need to look at, is there a way of phasing the works? So we do sections at a time where you can afford to decamp certain sections.
Yeah. Or bunch people up to one end or something like that kind of thing. It really does depend on the situation and the environment. Obviously, we're just trying to cover off as many as possible, just so...
Things to think about.
Yeah, things to think about. It sparks ideas off.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. So there isn't really any other solution for that. Because even if you went for, I don't know, maybe sheeting the ceiling below, that's still not going to be adequate, because essentially if you do put your foot through something...
That's going to go straight through...
You're going to put your foot through the sheeting
poly
as well.
Yeah, the poly's going to be damaged, and then therefore you've then got a contaminated room.
Yeah, maybe you could, I don't know, depending on the actual makeup of the ceiling, you know, sometimes if there was like a secondary ceiling below it, like for instance, I don't know, I've seen it on a few occasions, you got an old lava plaster ceiling, and then what they've done, they instead of ripping that down, they've just installed a plasterboard ceiling below that.
Yeah.
That may be an occasion where, depending on the room, you may be able to get away with that's your secondary ceiling, and that could be your cleanable void.
Yes. Yeah, I see where you're going with that. That gives you a void that can be cleaned. You just have to have the access below it in place and be able to get up to every part of that to make sure it can be cleaned and cleaned safely. Yeah, I mean, essentially the main kind of risk, apart from the asbestos, that kind of thing, it's the fall from height and the penetrating non-asbestos areas.
Yeah. Something else to consider, obviously, is the working environment within the lofts as well. Because I don't know if you've ever been into your loft at home in the summer. Jesus, how hot is it?
Yeah.
You know, it's freezing cold in, because there's no insulation. Usually, in most lofts, there's no insulation between the roof and the outside. So, you know, it's freezing cold in winter and bloody scorching hot in summer.
That is an issue when you've got people working in there. Definitely that needs to be considered.
On the summer hot days, you're doing a 8-hour shift in that loft. That's a bloody hot, long day. Yeah,
exactly. You know, hot works, it needs to be considered massively. You need to look at how you control that and whether works can be done at other times, or whether you need to employ air conditioning, air cooling equipment that can cool the area down. And
because again, even at night, sometimes in the summer,
they don't.
It just retains that heat.
The problem with that as well, like kind of aside from the personnel doing the works, what about your enclosure materials?
Yeah.
And like we said earlier, say you take a phased approach of doing it section by section. Well, if you're doing it in the summer, with the best will in the world, you'll put an enclosure up one day, and the next day you'll come in and it'll be on the floor, because the heat will melt the glue, everything will fall from kind of where all the polythene sheeting's been taped together, the actual weight will pull it all down from where it's all been stapled up onto timbers and stuff.
Yeah.
And that can massively affect how the works are carried out as well.
Yeah.
I think that covers everything kind of off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Hope you've enjoyed that one. Again, just kind of things to consider with different environments and different places where we carry out asbestos works and where you might require it. Lofts and attics they're not as straightforward as you'd think. I think some people would think, well, they're off out the way, it's nothing, but yeah, it kind of is that from a normal access point of view. But when it comes to working in there, it is more of a risk.
Yeah, and it's definitely more disruptive than you would think to your occupants and what you're doing on site. Yeah, hope you like that one. So remember, asbestos first, not last.